I came home early to surprise my wife with dinner. Instead, I found a stranger's watch on the table, and laughter behind our bedroom door. That was the moment everything changed. It was a quiet Thursday evening in late September when I pulled into the driveway of our home in Brookville, a small town tucked between empty roads and forgotten fields. The engine of my old Ford rumbled for a moment before I turned it off, leaving behind a silence that seemed too thick for comfort. I was home earlier than usual. Business at the auto shop had been unusually slow. Just a couple of brake pad replacements, and an old man needing a tire patch. I figured leaving a bit early wouldn't hurt. Maybe I could finally sit down for dinner with Emma, just the two of us, like we used to. The air outside was warm, tinged with the fading light of early autumn. Leaves had just started to turn, dotting the trees with shades of red and amber. The house stood still, bathed in the last stretch of sunlight, the porch casting long shadows across the dry lawn. I paused for a second before stepping onto the path, taking in the silence of the neighborhood. It was the kind of calm that should have brought peace. Instead, something inside me coiled uneasy. Lately, things with Emma had been different. She had grown distant, distracted. I chalked it up to stress. Her job as a regional marketing rep kept her on the move, constantly checking emails and hopping on late-night calls. Still, something hadn't felt right for a while, and I had done my best to ignore it. When I stepped through the front door, the house greeted me with an almost eerie silence. No faint sound of a TV in the background, no dishes clinking in the kitchen. Just quiet. I called out her name in my head but didn't speak it aloud. Something held me back. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fear of confirming what my gut had been screaming for weeks. I walked slowly through the hallway, my boots making dull thuds on the hardwood floor. The living room was empty, but not untouched. That's when I saw it, a silver watch resting on the edge of the coffee table. It was sleek, high-end, the kind you'd see on men in business magazines or flashy commercials. It didn't belong to me. I hadn't seen it before. Its presence in my house was a whisper of betrayal, loud enough to drown out reason. I picked it up. It felt heavy in my hand, foreign. I turned it over, scanning for a name or clue, but there was nothing. Just a smooth, polished surface that somehow made the room feel colder. My eyes shifted around the room, landing next on a blazer tossed over the back of the chair. It was designer, far too nice for anyone I'd ever call a friend. I didn't need more proof. My stomach turned, bow rising with realization. The air thickened as I walked toward the stairs. Each step felt like dragging my feet through concrete. The upstairs hallway was dim, only lit by the sun's retreating glow sneaking in through the window. As I reached the bedroom door, faint sounds reached my ears, soft laughter, movement, and then sudden quiet. My hand wrapped around the knob, shaking slightly. I hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. I pushed the door open. And there she was. Emma. The woman I'd shared a home with for 8 years. She wasn't alone. Her body was tangled with another man's, someone I didn't recognize at first glance. My mind registered his face only seconds later. Ryan Wells. Gym owner, all charm and arrogance. The kind of man who liked being seen and admired. He was in my bed. For a moment, time fractured. I couldn't hear anything but the pounding in my ears. Emma's face twisted in horror, her mouth opening to speak, but no sound came. Her eyes locked with mine. I saw panic. Guilt. Maybe even shame. None of it mattered. My hands trembled as I stepped back, then forward again. Rage crackled through my chest like lightning. My belt came off almost without me realizing it. I lunged. The man had barely rolled out of bed before I was on him. I didn't speak. I didn't scream. I let the belt talk for me. It struck his shoulder, his ribs, his back. Each impact brought a dull, sickening thud. There were cries, one of them mine, the others a mixture of pain and pleading. I didn't stop until the man lay curled on the floor, gasping and bruised. Emma was sobbing, curled into the corner of the room like she didn't know who I was anymore. Maybe I didn't either. I stood over him, chest heaving. My hand still clenched the belt. His blood had stained the floor, proof of everything that had just shattered inside me. There was nothing left to say. I turned my eyes to Emma. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Everything had already been said the moment I opened that door. She destroyed what we had. And in that moment I knew I'd never forgive her. 2 weeks had crawled by since the night I tore everything apart, since I stood in the ruins of the life I thought I'd built with Emma. The shop had become my only escape, a dim haven filled with grease, noise, and the comfort of things that made sense. I spent long hours under cars, wrench in hand, trying to keep my thoughts buried beneath the sound of engines. But no matter how loud the noise, the silence still found its way in. It was the kind of silence that settled deep, the kind that clung to the walls and crept into your chest when you lay awake at night. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just went numb. Now I sat in a cold, impersonal office on the 3rd floor of a downtown building, the city outside draped in gray clouds. The blinds were half drawn. Fluorescent lights hummed above. My lawyer, Martin Walker, sat across from me, his hands gliding over a neat stack of papers, my divorce papers. His voice was calm, neutral, clinical. He asked questions about property, shared accounts, car titles. I answered each one like I was giving a weather report. Detached. Empty. There were no arguments, no shouting, no fights over furniture or money. Emma and I had no kids. No pets. Nothing left to tie us together but ink on paper and a past that felt like it belonged to someone else. Martin glanced up over his glasses. "Given the evidence of infidelity," he said in that steady tone of his, "you're in a favorable position, Luke. The court won't look kindly on her actions." Favorable. That word meant nothing to me. There was no winning here. Just ending. I heard the door open behind me, but I didn't need to turn around. I felt it in the air, a shift, like a cold draft sneaking into a room. Emma stepped inside. She didn't say a word as she sat down. I saw her in the corner of my eye, and even that small glimpse was enough to take in the damage. Her appearance was nothing like the polished, confident woman I once knew. Her hair was tied back in a loose, messy knot. Her face pale. No makeup. Her eyes sunken, skin thinner, shoulders slumped like the weight of everything was crushing her. The silence stretched long between us. Martin tapped the bottom of the agreement with his pen. "Once this is signed, it's final. No contest, no delays." Emma shifted in her seat. Her voice came out soft, broken at the edges. "Luke, please." I didn't answer. I kept my eyes on the papers. "I know I made a mistake," she whispered, her voice fragile. I just... Can we talk? Just talk?" My gaze flicked to her, slow and deliberate. What I saw wasn't the woman I married. She was a faded version. The one who used to laugh at my jokes, who stayed up with me late into the night talking about nothing. She wasn't here anymore. And I couldn't pretend she was. "You already said enough," I muttered, my tone flat. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back, trying to hold some fragment of dignity. Her hands fidgeted in her lap as she searched for something to hold on to. "I ruined everything, I know that. But can't we try again?" There it was, the plea. But I felt nothing. Just the cold. "You made your choice," I said. "Now live with it." She looked down, shattered. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Martin, professional as ever, slid the pen toward me. I didn't hesitate. The signature came easily, like closing the door on a house that had already burned to the ground. Emma's voice came again, barely a whisper. "I still love you." The words hit like a memory from another life, and for a fraction of a second, something flickered inside me. But it died just as fast. Love couldn't undo what I'd seen, what I'd felt. I stood, the chair scraping back behind me. "It doesn't matter." She didn't follow me. I walked out of that office and never looked back. Out on the sidewalk, the wind picked up, cool and dry. People passed me by, going about their lives, unaware of the quiet devastation walking among them. I shoved my hands into my jacket pockets and kept moving. The sound of her voice still rang faintly in my ears, but it couldn't touch me anymore. She was gone. Not just from my life, but from the part of me that used to believe in us. And what was left? Just the weight of silence. But at least now, it was mine alone. It was a cold Sunday afternoon in early October when she came back. I had just returned from the shop, my hands still stained with grease, the scent of motor oil hanging on my clothes like a second skin. The air outside was sharp, the sky pressed low and colorless above the rooftops. A storm was brewing in the distance, and the wind scraped dry leaves across the porch. I wasn't expecting anyone. These days, no one knocked unless it was business, and even that was rare. The sound that came at the door wasn't urgent, just a soft, steady knock that carried a strange weight. I stood still in the kitchen, letting it echo through the house. Something inside me already knew who it was. When I opened the door, I saw her. Emma stood on the steps, barely more than a silhouette against the gray world behind her. The woman I had once come home to, the one who wore clean lines, held herself with unshakable poise, was gone. In her place was someone hollow. Her clothes were wrinkled, her face drawn and pale, and her eyes, they didn't shine anymore. They begged without words. She didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. The desperation clung to her like the cold. Her hand clutched a small bag to her side, as if it contained the last threads of whatever life she had left. Her shoulders trembled slightly beneath a coat far too thin for the season. I didn't open the door wider. I didn't step back. We simply stood there in silence, the wind slipping between us. She opened her mouth once, as if to explain, then closed it. I already knew. I could see it in her posture, in the way her knees slightly bent under exhaustion. She had nowhere else to go. There was no anger in me anymore. Only finality. The kind that settles in your bones when something has been buried for good. I waited, not because I was curious, but because I wanted her to understand that this was not her home anymore. Eventually, her lips parted. She tried to speak, to offer some hollow justification, but her voice cracked before the words fully formed. Her hands trembled as she wiped her eyes, but I saw no tears fall. Whatever she wanted to say died in her throat, and she looked down, defeated. She stayed like that for a while, standing in the threshold of what used to be her life. Hoping, maybe, for a flicker of grace. But I had none left. I had used it all up on the nights I waited for her to come home, on the doubts I swallowed, on the betrayal that burned through me like acid. I closed the door. Slowly. Without force, without rage. Just certainty. Through the thin glass, I saw her collapse onto the porch steps, her figure folding into itself. The wind tugged at her coat, her hair, her dignity. But I didn't move. I stayed where I was, listening to the quiet return to the house. She left eventually. Walked down the path like a shadow retreating into fog. That night, the silence inside the house felt heavier than usual. I sat at the table for hours, the lights dim, the beer untouched. I told myself over and over again that I did the right thing. That letting her back in would have been weakness, not kindness. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, and inside, I reminded myself she was the one who broke it all. And I had nothing left for her. Nothing at all. The days that followed blurred together. Work at the shop filled the hours, but not the space inside me. I kept my head down, hands busy, the noise of tools and engines louder than the quiet at home. But even with the distraction, the image of her on the porch haunted the edges of my mind, her shoulders bent, her silence louder than anything she could have said. I told myself it was over. That it wasn't my concern. That I had no reason to think about Emma anymore. Then, one morning in late October, just after sunrise, I stopped to fill up my truck at the gas station near the shop. The streets were empty, the sky a muted blue, the world still half asleep. I liked mornings like that. They felt untouched. But as I stood by the pump, I noticed a figure slumped near the curb. At first, it didn't register, just a shape folded in on itself, dirty coat pulled tight, hair matted, skin pale. I might have kept walking. I might have looked away. Until she lifted her head. It was her. Emma. Gaunt. Hollow. Not just thinner, but smaller. Like life had carved pieces out of her. She didn't speak. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment the world shrank to the space between us. There was no anger there. No shame. Just the dull gaze of someone who had run out of places to go. She tried to stand but stumbled, catching herself on the edge of the sidewalk. Her lips moved, a whisper carried away by the wind. I didn't ask what she said. I didn't need to. She reached out, not with her hand, but with her eyes. A silent question. A final plea. I didn't answer. I let the pump click back into place, climbed into my truck, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, she stayed seated on the curb, her figure getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. That night I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about her, about the dirt under her nails, the way her coat clung to her, the vacant look in her eyes. It didn't bring me sorrow. It didn't even bring satisfaction. Just a strange, heavy stillness. Over the next few days, I started hearing things. A customer at the shop mentioned a woman hanging around the old motel on the edge of town. Described her like someone who'd been swallowed by the world and spat back out. Said she looked lost. Said she was desperate. I knew who they were talking about. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. I could picture it all. The flickering motel lights, the cracked pavement, the heavy doors closing behind men who didn't care what her name used to be. One evening, I found myself driving past that side of town. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself I had errands to run. But the truth was simpler. I needed to see for myself. I kept the truck in the shadows, the engine low. The motel looked worse than I remembered. A few cars out front. A man smoking near the stairs. I spotted her near the corner, leaning against a railing, arms crossed, face stiff. She was wearing something too thin for the cold. Her makeup was heavy, but it couldn't hide the bruises beneath. She looked like a ghost of the life I used to know. A stranger trapped in a body I once loved. She didn't see me. And I didn't let her. I drove home in silence. That night, I stood in the kitchen, lights off, beer in hand. I thought about how far she'd fallen. How quickly it all unraveled. There was no sense of justice, no triumph. Just emptiness. Like watching a slow collapse from behind glass, close enough to feel, too far to stop. I used to think that her suffering might balance something inside me. That maybe seeing her fall would lift the weight she left behind. But it didn't. It only made the silence louder. And she was still out there. Alone. Weeks passed. Rumors started filling the quiet. Customers at the shop talked in half-lowered voices. Someone saw her near the rundown apartments on Mayfield. Someone else mentioned she'd been staying with an older man, Don Harper, the landlord, known more for his temper than his generosity. The implication was clear, and no one had to say it outright. I listened without reacting. Just nodding, maybe offering a flat comment. Inside, something twisted, not quite anger, not quite relief. Just a cold flicker of something I didn't want to name. They said she was surviving. Barely. That shed traded what was left of her pride for a roof, for heat, for food. She moved like a shadow now, barely seen, easily forgotten. But not by me. Every time I heard her name, it stirred something old and bitter in me. But it wasn't grief. It was darker. I told myself she deserved it. That life was just balancing the scale. But the more I told myself that, the less I believed it. One night, I sat alone at the bar with a few guys from work. The place was loud with the kind of laughter that didn't mean anything. Then her name came up again. Someone had seen her, kicked out of the Mayfield building. Even Harper had no more use for her. The way they said it, like gossip, like sport, it made my skin crawl. I didn't speak. I just finished my drink, left money on the counter, and walked out into the cold. The streets were quiet. Headlights slid across wet pavement. I walked without a plan, without direction. Just trying to outrun the heaviness that had settled somewhere behind my ribs. That night, sleep didn't come. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, surrounded by the stillness of a house that once held laughter. I thought about Emma, about how she'd begged for help on my porch, about the silence in her eyes when I saw her near the gas station, about how far she'd fallen. And still, I couldn't feel sorry. But I couldn't feel satisfied either. Days turned colder. Frost clung to the edges of the windows in the mornings. The shop stayed busy, and I stayed buried in routine. I told myself that meant I was moving on, that I was healing. But healing didn't feel like this. I stopped asking about her, but the stories kept finding me. Emma had been seen again, this time near the shelters downtown. Rumors said she was taking anyone who would have her. That she looked sick. That she talked to herself sometimes, pacing back and forth outside the grocery store like she didn't know where she was. I didn't go to see her. But I thought about it. At night, I found myself staring at the boxes in the hallway, the ones with her things I never unpacked or threw out. Just left there. Like maybe I was waiting for something. Closure, maybe? Or punishment. I opened one once. Looked at a photo buried beneath some folded clothes. Her smile in that picture didn't look real anymore. It looked like something out of a different life. I put it back. Closed the box. Left it where it was. The next week, someone mentioned she'd vanished. No one had seen her in days. The apartment where she'd been squatting was empty now. People assumed the worst. I didn't ask. But the silence that followed felt final. And yet, it didn't feel like victory. One evening, I sat by the kitchen window as the sun sank low behind the trees. The house was quiet, untouched. Everything in its place, and still it felt hollow. I thought about what she'd lost. What I'd lost. What we'd destroyed. Her collapse hadn't repaired the cracks in me. Watching her disappear hadn't brought back who I used to be. In the end, it wasn't justice. It wasn't revenge. It was just ruin, spread thin across two lives that once meant something. That's the part no one talks about. You don't walk away clean. You just walk away.